The wind carried no birdsong across the ashen plateau, only the dry whisper of dust sweeping over broken stone roads that had once connected thriving kingdoms before centuries of war erased nearly every map. Travelers avoided the place because compasses spun without reason, shadows lingered too long after sunset, and strange lights wandered between abandoned watchtowers, yet a lone rider guided a gray horse across the empty land with calm determination. His white robe fluttered behind him, stained by countless journeys rather than decorated with symbols of rank, and beneath its weathered folds rested a simple wooden staff polished smooth by decades of use. His name was Aldrin, and in every city where old stories were still told around fireplaces, people argued over whether he truly existed. Some claimed he had defeated armies without drawing blood. Others insisted he had spoken to mountains until they moved aside. Children imagined him as a legend who would appear whenever darkness became unbearable, while scholars dismissed those tales as comforting fiction. Aldrin himself encouraged neither belief nor disbelief because he had learned long ago that legends distracted people from the difficult choices standing directly before them. He sought neither glory nor followers. His purpose was far quieter and infinitely heavier. He was the last white-robed mage, the final keeper of an ancient discipline that bound magic to responsibility instead of conquest, and every year that burden grew more difficult to carry because fewer people remembered why such restraint had ever mattered. As evening settled across the plateau, the horse suddenly stopped. Aldrin gently patted its neck before looking toward the distant horizon where a thin ribbon of black smoke climbed into the crimson sky. He closed his eyes, extending his awareness beyond sight. Most mages forced magic into the world like a hammer striking metal, but the white-robed order listened first. Beneath the wind he sensed fear, beneath the fear anger, beneath the anger the unmistakable pulse of corrupted sorcery spreading through frightened minds like poison dissolving into water. He sighed quietly. Again, he murmured, not with frustration but with sadness. By midnight he reached the village of Brindle Hollow. Half the homes still burned while exhausted survivors struggled to carry buckets from a shallow well that had nearly run dry. No soldiers guarded the streets. No banners identified the attackers. Chickens wandered unattended between shattered carts, and frightened children huddled inside the remains of a bakery whose stone walls had resisted the flames. When the villagers noticed the stranger in white approaching through the smoke, several immediately backed away. An elderly woman grabbed a kitchen knife with trembling hands. A young man lifted a broken spear. Fear had taught them to distrust every unfamiliar face. Aldrin dismounted slowly, raised both empty hands, and spoke in a voice that carried neither authority nor pleading. Your fire comes first. Questions can wait. Without waiting for permission he touched his staff lightly against the ground. Pale threads of light spread through the cracked earth, reaching hidden pockets of underground moisture before rising into the burning buildings as columns of cool mist. Flames shrank, hissed, and finally surrendered to clouds of steam. The villagers stared in stunned silence. No explosion accompanied the spell. No dazzling spectacle announced impossible power. The fire simply lost its strength as if persuaded to rest. A little girl with soot covering her face stepped closer than the adults dared. Are you a wizard? She asked. Aldrin smiled faintly. Sometimes people call me that. Can you bring my father back? The question struck harder than any weapon. Aldrin looked toward the covered bodies arranged beside the village well. No, he answered honestly. I cannot. The girl nodded with heartbreaking acceptance before returning to her mother. She had already learned that hope and reality rarely walked together. Hour later the villagers gathered around the square while Aldrin listened to every account without interrupting. The attack had begun shortly before dawn. No army marched into Brindle Hollow. Instead neighbors suddenly turned against one another. Friends attacked lifelong companions. Farmers seized axes and torches with empty expressions. Brothers fought brothers while screaming accusations no one understood. Then strangers dressed in dark armor entered only after the chaos had reached its peak, collecting several villagers before disappearing into the eastern forest. They ignored valuables, livestock, and food. They came for people, not possessions. Aldrin asked careful questions, searching for details others considered insignificant. Did anyone hear music before the violence began? Had unusual travelers visited recently? Did the wells taste different? One old carpenter finally remembered a peddler selling polished black mirrors 3 days earlier. Nearly every household had purchased one because the glass reflected faces with astonishing clarity. Aldrin requested to see the mirrors. Those that survived the fire had all fractured in identical patterns, spiderweb cracks radiating from the center despite showing no signs of impact. He examined one silently before wrapping it inside cloth. "Whoever did this wanted anger to spread faster than reason," he said. The mirrors carried enchantments that echoed hidden resentment until ordinary disagreements became murderous certainty. The villagers exchanged horrified glances. A blacksmith slammed his fist against a table. "Then none of this was our fault." Aldrin looked directly into the man's eyes. The spell opened a door. People still chose to walk through it. Magic can amplify hatred, but it cannot create feelings that never existed. The uncomfortable truth settled over the gathering. Old arguments, buried jealousy, unpaid debts, and quiet bitterness had become weapons once the enchantment removed restraint. Several villagers lowered their heads, remembering cruel words they had spoken before violence erupted. Guilt mixed with grief until neither emotion could be separated from the other. Before dawn, Aldrin prepared to leave. The village elder tried to press a heavy pouch of silver into his hands. He declined with gentle firmness. "Use it to rebuild." "Then at least tell us where you're going," the elder insisted. Aldrin glanced toward the eastern forest where pale fog drifted between ancient trees. "To find whoever profits when neighbors forget they belong to the same world." His horse carried him beneath towering branches where sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor. Moss-covered fallen ruins from civilizations forgotten even by historians. Strange flowers opened only when no one looked directly at them. Tiny creatures with translucent wings watched from hollow logs before vanishing whenever Aldrin smiled at them. By afternoon he discovered fresh wagon tracks leading deeper into the wilderness. Following them required caution because the forest itself had become restless. Trees shifted positions after he passed. Paths ended where maps insisted roads continued. Invisible voices occasionally whispered his name using tones borrowed from long-dead friends. None of the illusions deceived him because white-robed mages trained not merely to recognize falsehood but to understand why deception appealed to the heart. Every illusion promised comfort tailored precisely to the person witnessing it. Resisting required accepting uncomfortable truths willingly. Near sunset, Aldrin reached a river crossed by an ancient stone bridge whose center had collapsed generations earlier. Fresh ropes now stretched between the broken sections, forming a narrow crossing above roaring water. As he approached, a clear young voice echoed from the opposite bank. "One more step and you'll lose your horse." Aldrin looked up to see a woman perched atop the ruined arch, balancing effortlessly despite the dizzying height. She wore practical traveling clothes patched in several places, carried 3 knives visibly while undoubtedly hiding more, and observed him with alert gray eyes that measured every movement. "That's thoughtful advice," Aldrin replied. "Thank you." She frowned slightly, apparently expecting suspicion rather than gratitude. "The third rope is cut halfway through. Anyone heavier than me falls." Aldrin examined the bridge before nodding. "You planned the trap?" "4 bandits. Did it work?" She smiled with unmistakable satisfaction. 3 times. Aldrin chuckled quietly. "Effective." She climbed down with agile confidence, never taking her eyes off him. "You're either incredibly calm or incredibly foolish. Both have been suggested before." She circled him once. "You're the old mage people keep inventing stories about." "People certainly enjoy stories." "So it's true?" "Some parts." She folded her arms. "Convenient answer. Usually the honest ones are." After a long silence, she finally introduced herself as Lyra, a courier who transported messages across territories where armies made ordinary roads impossible to travel. She possessed an exceptional memory, remarkable survival instincts, and almost no patience for authority. She admitted she had been secretly following the mysterious wagons Aldrin now tracked because several clients had disappeared after investigating the same convoy. "You're not the only curious traveler," she said.
Aldrin asked whether she wished to continue alone. Not anymore, she answered immediately. Anyone enchanting villages isn't a problem solved with clever rope traps. Their partnership began not through dramatic declarations but through practical necessity. Over the following days they navigated forgotten trails while exchanging stories around evening campfires. Lyra constantly challenged Aldrin's quiet philosophy. If you're powerful enough to stop wars, she argued one night while sharpening a knife, why not simply destroy every tyrant? Aldrin stirred the fire thoughtfully. Because someone else would inherit their throne believing violence solved every problem. Maybe they're right. For a while. Sometimes a while is enough. Aldrin picked up a burning branch and held it toward the darkness. Fire clears dead wood. It also burns homes. The same force creates different futures depending on who controls it and why. Lyra remained unconvinced, yet she noticed he never avoided difficult questions. He simply refused easy answers. On the fifth evening they reached the ruins of an enormous observatory carved into a mountainside. Broken domes pointed toward stars no astronomer had studied for centuries. Strange machinery covered in vines still turned slowly despite obvious decay, driven by invisible mechanisms beneath the earth. Fresh footprints surrounded the entrance. Aldrin knelt beside them. Children, he observed. Several. Lyra frowned. The villagers said people were kidnapped. They entered cautiously. Inside, candlelight flickered through endless corridors lined with shattered celestial maps. Soft singing echoed somewhere deep underground. The melody sounded gentle enough to calm frightened hearts, yet Aldrin's expression hardened the moment he heard it. Do not listen too closely, he warned. Why? Lyra whispered. Because the song remembers what you most regret. Even as he spoke, Lyra felt the melody changing. Suddenly she no longer heard unfamiliar voices but her younger brother laughing years before he had drowned during a river crossing she failed to prevent. Tears filled her eyes before she realized she had unconsciously begun walking toward the music. Aldrin struck his staff against the stone floor. The clear ringing sound shattered the illusion like glass breaking across still water. Lyra staggered backward, breathing hard. That wasn't just memory, she gasped. No, Aldrin said. It was invitation. Together they advanced deeper beneath the observatory where the singing abruptly stopped. In the vast chamber ahead dozens of children sat peacefully in perfect circles, their eyes closed as black crystal pendants rested against their chests. Standing among them was a tall figure wrapped entirely in dark robes embroidered with silver threads that resembled fractured constellations. Without turning around the stranger spoke. I wondered how long it would take the last white robe to find me. Aldrin tightened his grip on the wooden staff but kept his voice steady. Release them. The robed figure slowly faced him, revealing neither monstrous features nor cruel scars but an ordinary middle-aged man whose calm smile seemed almost welcoming. They are not prisoners, he replied. They are students. Lyra glanced at the silent children. None appeared injured, yet none reacted to the conversation. The stranger extended one hand politely. My name is Severin. You and I inherited opposite halves of the same forgotten world, Aldrin. Perhaps before deciding to become enemies, we should discuss which of us is truly trying to save what remains. Aldrin studied Severin without speaking, allowing the silence to linger until it became uncomfortable for everyone except the man in dark. Visions of existence itself. One side wanted a world where nothing was uncertain. The other demanded a world where choice remained possible, even if choice meant mistakes. Behind them stood the echo, waiting to be understood. Before them stood those who believed understanding was enough reason to control. And in the center stood Aldrin, carrying the final responsibility of a vanished order, knowing that whatever decision came next would not only determine whether humanity survived. It would determine what kind of existence survival was meant to preserve. Robes, who seemed perfectly content to wait. Lyra shifted her weight, keeping one hand near the hilt of a knife while quietly counting the exits from the chamber. The children remained seated in flawless circles, their breathing synchronized with unnatural precision, each rise and fall of their chests matching the others as though they shared a single heartbeat. Tiny streams of blue light drifted from the crystal pendants around their necks toward the ceiling, weaving together into a glowing web that shimmered across ancient carvings of stars and planets. "If this is a school," Aldrin finally said, "your students are not free to ask questions." Severin's smile faded only slightly. "Freedom is a luxury offered to people who live in peaceful times. We do not." "Then teach them how to create peace." "Peace?" Severin laughed quietly. "You spent decades wandering kingdoms. Tell me honestly. How many rulers truly wanted peace after victory became possible?" Aldrin did not answer immediately because he had met too many kings who had confused conquest with stability. Severin noticed the hesitation. "Exactly. Every generation repeats the same mistakes because everyone insists on preserving choice. I have grown tired of watching children inherit disasters they never created." Lyra stepped forward before Aldrin could reply. "Kidnapping them isn't protecting them." Severin looked at her with genuine curiosity. "Do you think they were safe in their villages?" "One child was beaten because he could read faster than the local priest. Another was promised to a warlord as payment for unpaid taxes. 2 sisters survived a plague only to be sold separately by distant relatives. Tell me which home I stole them from." His words struck with uncomfortable force. Lyra remembered the frightened faces in Brindle Hollow and found no easy response. Severin continued, his voice calm rather than triumphant. "I remove fear from their minds. I remove hatred before it grows roots. I remove the memories that would turn them into the next generation of tyrants." Aldrin's gaze settled on the silent children. "You also remove who they are. Identity is overrated. Responsibility is not." Severin sighed as though disappointed by an old friend's stubbornness. "You still believe suffering teaches wisdom?" "No," Aldrin answered. "I believe people deserve the chance to decide what suffering means." The air between them tightened. Magic gathered almost invisibly, not as brilliant flashes or violent storms but as subtle pressure that made every candle flame lean toward the center of the chamber. Lyra instinctively backed away from the invisible current flowing between the 2 mages. She had witnessed sword fights before, but this felt entirely different. Neither man appeared eager to strike first because each understood the consequences better than anyone else present. Instead, their wills pressed against one another like opposing tides. Fine cracks crept across the stone beneath Severin's boots while Aldrin's staff vibrated softly against the floor. Then one of the children suddenly cried out in pain. The magical tension vanished instantly. Both mages turned toward the sound. A young boy clutched his chest as the black crystal around his neck began glowing bright crimson. The light spread beneath his skin in branching patterns that resembled burning veins. Severin hurried to him with unmistakable concern, kneeling beside the child. "No," he whispered, "not yet." Aldrin was already moving. Severin glanced up sharply. "Stay back. If you wait another minute, he'll die." Severin hesitated for the first time. That single moment revealed everything Aldrin needed to know. Whatever spell bound the children together had become unstable. Aldrin knelt opposite Severin without asking permission. Their eyes met across the suffering child. "If we work together," Aldrin said quietly, "he lives." Severin searched his face for deception and found none. Slowly he nodded. "Very well." The 2 mages placed their hands above the boy's chest. Their magic could not have been more different. Severin's power resembled carefully engineered machinery, precise and forceful, redirecting torrents of dark energy through invisible channels. Aldrin's flowed like water, finding the easiest path downhill, soothing rather than commanding. The conflicting methods collided, trembled, then unexpectedly settled into balance. The crimson glow receded little by little until the boy's breathing steadied. He opened frightened eyes, looked from one mage to the other, and whispered, "Am I in trouble?" Aldrin smiled gently. "No." Severin adjusted the child's blanket before standing. His expression had changed. "Leave," he said, not angrily but with quiet exhaustion. Lyra frowned. "That's it?" "Today, yes." Aldrin remained where he was.
The crystals are failing. Severin looked toward the ceiling where blue streams of light flickered irregularly.
I know.
Because they were never designed for children.
Severin's shoulders stiffened. You remember the old archives. Enough of them. After a long pause, Severin turned away. Go before I change my mind.
Neither Aldrin nor Lyra argued. They left the observatory beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations.
Several miles passed before Lyra finally spoke.
He could have killed us.
He could have tried, Aldrin replied. No.
I mean before we even entered.
Aldrin nodded. Yes. Then why didn't he? Because he truly believes he's saving those children. Lyra kicked a loose stone into the undergrowth.
That almost makes him more dangerous.
It often does.
They camped beside a quiet lake whose surface reflected the moon so perfectly that it seemed impossible to tell where water ended and sky began. Lyra remained awake long after Aldrin had closed his eyes. She replayed Severin's words repeatedly. She had expected a monster and instead found someone whose compassion had twisted into something frightening. The simplicity she preferred, good people on one side, villains on the other, had dissolved. Before dawn, Aldrin spoke without opening his eyes.
You're still awake.
I keep wondering if he's right about one thing.
Which thing? Children don't choose the wars they're born into. Aldrin opened his eyes slowly. No. They don't.
Then why should they suffer because adults refuse to change? He sat beside the dying fire, feeding another branch into the glowing embers.
A question can be true without leading to the right answer. Hunger exists. That does not justify stealing from every neighbor forever. Pain exists. That does not justify taking away every difficult memory. The challenge is solving one truth without destroying another. Lyra considered his words until sunrise painted the lake with streaks of gold.
Their journey resumed eastward into the Iron Hills, where abandoned mines honeycombed the mountains. Several villages there had recently reported disappearances, but unlike Brindle Hollow, no violence accompanied them.
Entire families simply vanished overnight, leaving meals untouched and doors standing open. The first settlement they reached felt unnaturally clean. Laundry still hung outside homes despite weeks of rain.
Fresh bread rested inside an oven that had long since gone cold.
Even the livestock wandered calmly through empty streets without signs of neglect.
No struggle, Lyra observed.
Aldrin examined footprints preserved in dried mud.
Every trail led toward the northern hills.
Not one returned. They followed the tracks until they reached the entrance to a forgotten silver mine. A faint humming drifted from within, rhythmic enough to resemble breathing.
Torches burned inside despite no visible caretaker.
Deep underground they discovered enormous chambers transformed into workshops where hundreds of intricate mechanical figures stood motionless. Some resembled people while others looked like birds, wolves, or towering giants. Every construct possessed polished white eyes made from unfamiliar crystal.
At the center of the cavern, an elderly woman wearing thick leather gloves adjusted gears inside a metal child seated upon a workbench.
She glanced up. Only briefly.
"You're late," she said without surprise.
Lyra blinked. "Were you expecting us?" "No."
The woman tightened a screw before continuing.
"I expected someone eventually. Curiosity always arrives behind catastrophe." Aldrin stepped closer. "Where are the missing families?" "Safe." "Where?" "Working." She pointed toward a tunnel branching deeper into the mine. "Voluntarily." Lyra's patience evaporated. "Everyone keeps saying that."
The woman laughed, wiping grease from her hands.
"Because people assume force is the only way to control others. Sometimes all you have to do is offer what they've always wanted." Aldrin studied the mechanical child.
Its face had been crafted with extraordinary care, every expression line sculpted lovingly despite the figure remaining lifeless. "You build guardians," he observed.
"Companions," the woman corrected. "Workers. Teachers. Caretakers. Whatever is needed. She finally introduced herself as Mara, once the greatest engineer in the Royal Academies before funding disappeared after decades of war. Kingdoms preferred weapons over machines that could improve ordinary lives. She had spent 30 years developing constructs capable of replacing dangerous labor, preventing famine, and rebuilding ruined towns, only to watch every ruler demand military versions instead. Refusing those requests had made her an exile. So I found people who were tired of waiting for permission to build a better future, she said. The missing families chose to help me. Aldrin noticed fresh sawdust on the floor beside wooden crates marked with the same fractured star symbol embroidered upon Severin's robe. You worked together. Mara nodded without embarrassment. He protects minds. I rebuild civilization. Different talents, same destination. And the crystal mirrors? Aldrin asked. Her expression darkened. Those weren't my idea. But you knew. She did not deny it. Every alliance carries compromises. Before Aldrin could question further, a deafening crash echoed from the deepest tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling. Mara's calm disappeared instantly. Impossible. She grabbed a heavy lantern and hurried into the darkness. Aldrin and Lyra followed. They emerged into a colossal underground vault where dozens of unfinished constructs surrounded an enormous circular door carved directly into the mountain itself. Ancient symbols glowed across its surface as fresh fractures spread through the stone. Another thunderous impact shook the chamber from the opposite side. Everyone froze. A third strike split the center of the door, releasing a blast of icy air that extinguished every lantern except the pale glow radiating from Aldrin's staff. Mara stared in horror. It was supposed to stay asleep. The stone burst inward. Through the cloud of shattered rock stepped a towering figure covered in crystalline armor older than any kingdom still standing. Its empty eye sockets ignited with cold silver fire as it slowly surveyed the cavern. When it spoke, its voice echoed like grinding mountains. Who has awakened the sentinel of the seventh seal? Aldrin's expression became more serious than Lyra had ever seen. For the first time since meeting him, she watched genuine alarm cross the face of the last white-robed mage. Aldrin stepped forward before anyone else could speak, not because he expected his presence alone to calm the towering guardian but because hesitation often allowed fear to choose words that wisdom never would. The sentinel stood nearly twice the height of a man, its crystalline armor fractured by ages of confinement, each crack glowing faintly with silver light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Dust settled around its feet without ever touching the ancient metal beneath the crystal, as though even gravity respected whatever force had forged the being long before recorded history. Mara instinctively reached for a lever mounted beside the shattered doorway, but Aldrin raised a single finger without looking back. Don't! She froze. If I trigger the collapse, it buries all of us. If you trigger it, Aldrin replied quietly, it will assume you are hiding something worth protecting. The sentinel's burning gaze shifted toward Mara before returning to Aldrin. You understand the protocols. Some of them. State your order. The white mantle. For the first time the enormous figure became perfectly still. Extinct. Almost. Verification required. Aldrin planted his staff upright on the stone floor and slowly removed a narrow leather cord from beneath his robe. Hanging from it was a small white crystal no larger than a walnut. Unlike the black crystals Severin used, this one contained no visible light. It appeared ordinary until the sentinel extended a massive hand toward it. Soft golden lines awakened inside the crystal, spreading outward in intricate geometric patterns that reflected across the guardian's armor. The sentinel lowered its head. Identity confirmed. Keeper designation accepted. Lyra stared in astonishment. You never mentioned carrying that. Aldrin smiled faintly. No one had ever asked. The sentinel's voice softened only slightly. Keeper. Explain why the seventh seal has been violated. Before Aldrin could answer, another tremor shook the cavern. The guardian looked toward the broken doorway, then beyond it into darkness so deep that even Aldrin could not see what lay inside.
Containment integrity has fallen below acceptable thresholds.
Delay increases extinction probability. Mara stepped forward despite obvious fear. I didn't open it.
The sentinel regarded her for several silent seconds.
Correct. Then who did?
The seal weakened from the interior.
Every person in the chamber exchanged uneasy glances. Lyra frowned. Something tried to get out? Negative. Then.
She stopped speaking as the implication settled over her.
Something inside had been trying to keep something else from entering. Aldrin's expression tightened. May we see the chamber?
The sentinel hesitated before stepping aside.
Proceed with caution. Historical contamination remains active.
Beyond the shattered doorway stretched an immense circular hall carved from black stone that reflected almost no light. Hundreds of crystal pillars surrounded the room, many broken or melted into distorted shapes. At its center rested what looked like the remains of an enormous tree fashioned entirely from translucent silver crystal. Its branches reached toward the ceiling like frozen lightning, yet most had snapped away long ago. Beneath the tree lay the skeleton of a human being dressed in robes nearly identical to Aldrin's. Time had reduced the fabric to brittle fragments, but the white embroidery remained strangely untouched.
Aldrin approached slowly and knelt beside the remains.
He bowed his head for several moments before speaking. His name was Edris.
Lyra looked surprised. You know him?
Only from stories. He disappeared more than 600 years ago.
Mara stared at the skeleton. That's impossible. Magic rarely concerns itself with our opinions about possibility.
Aldrin gently lifted a weathered journal from beneath the ancient mage's hand. The leather crumbled slightly at his touch, but the pages within had been preserved by powerful enchantments. He opened the book carefully. Most of the ink had faded beyond recognition, yet several passages remained legible. His face grew increasingly grave as he read.
Lyra waited impatiently. Well. Aldrin closed the journal. The white mantle didn't vanish because we lost a war. Then why?
Because we chose to erase ourselves.
Silence filled the chamber. Mara shook her head. No order destroys itself willingly. This one did. Aldrin looked toward the crystal tree.
Long ago magic began changing. Every spell left tiny fractures between the physical world and something older, something that existed before life learned to speak. Most mages ignored the warning signs because each fracture seemed insignificant.
Edris discovered the damage too late.
The white mantle sealed the largest breach and scattered the survivors so no future kingdom could force them into reopening it.
Lyra glanced uneasily toward the broken pillars. You're saying this room
was never a prison?
Aldrin's voice barely rose above a whisper. It was a bandage. As if responding to his words, faint whispers drifted through the hall. They did not resemble language.
Instead, they sounded like countless voices attempting to imitate speech without understanding what words were for.
Mara backed away immediately.
The sentinel raised one massive arm.
Contamination increasing.
Thin cracks spread across the floor beneath the crystal tree. Soft silver mist seeped upward through the fractures, moving not like smoke but like living threads searching for warmth. One thread brushed against a broken pillar. Instantly the stone dissolved into glittering dust without heat, explosion, or visible force.
Aldrin stood. Everyone out.
They hurried back into the outer cavern as the sentinel positioned itself before the shattered doorway.
Keeper, it said, containment cannot be restored alone. Aldrin already knew.
The journal had confirmed his deepest fear.
The white mantle sealing ritual had required 7 mages working in perfect harmony.
He was one man standing centuries after the others had died. Mara watched him carefully.
Can it be repaired? Not the same way. Then what? Aldrin did not answer because he genuinely did not know.
Before another word could be spoken, hurried footsteps echoed from the mine entrance. Several exhausted men and women emerged from the tunnels, clothes covered in dust, faces pale with panic. One recognized Mara immediately.
"They're here," he shouted.
"The northern camps are burning." Mara rushed toward him.
"Who attacked?" "Nobody we've ever seen. They don't kill people. They touch them." His breathing became uneven. "And then those people start following them." Aldrin looked sharply toward the mine entrance. "How many?"
"Hundreds." Outside, the afternoon sky had turned an unnatural shade of bronze. Thick clouds rolled across the mountains despite no wind driving them. From the ridge above the mine, countless figures descended in silent formation. Men, women, old soldiers, young farmers, merchants, shepherds, children barely old enough to carry tools, all walked with identical calm expressions.
None carried banners. Most held no weapons.
They simply advanced together at the same measured pace.
Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Those aren't soldiers." "No," Aldrin replied. "They're being guided."
At the front of the procession walked Severin. His dark robes moved gently despite the still air. He stopped several hundred feet from the mine entrance and raised one open hand.
Every follower halted at the exact same instant.
Severin's voice carried effortlessly across the valley.
"Aldrin. Severin.
You've discovered the seal."
"Yes." Severin nodded slowly.
"Then you understand why I couldn't tell you."
Mara stared in disbelief. "You knew?" Severin met her gaze. "I suspected. Not the location.
Only the truth buried beneath the old myths."
Aldrin stepped out into the open. "Turn these people loose." "I will. Now." Severin's expression became unexpectedly weary. "If I do, they scatter. They panic.
They return to kingdoms already collapsing.
Thousands will die before winter. That isn't your decision. Someone has to make decisions."
He swept one arm toward the mountains where distant smoke rose from unseen villages.
"Look around you.
Every realm is preparing for another war over resources that barely exist anymore.
Crops are failing. Rivers are changing course.
The old trade roads are haunted by creatures awakened from forgotten places.
Civilization is bleeding to death while rulers debate borders." Aldrin remained silent. Severin continued. "I gathered engineers because we need cities that can survive. I gathered children because they adapt more easily than broken adults. I gathered knowledge hidden by frightened scholars because sentimentality will not save anyone." Lyra stepped beside Aldrin. "And what happens to everyone who disagrees with you?" Severin answered without anger. "They are convinced." "You mean controlled?" "Temporarily." Aldrin's eyes never left Severin's. "The breach beneath the mountain is influencing your thoughts." Severin almost smiled. "You still believe corruption always looks ugly?" "No. Sometimes it looks reasonable." That answer lingered in the valley.
Severin's expression changed almost imperceptibly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before vanishing again. Then one elderly woman standing among his followers suddenly collapsed. Two others immediately helped her, but instead of comforting her they simply waited with blank expressions. Aldrin noticed thin silver veins spreading across the old woman's hands. His heartbeat quickened. He had seen similar markings only once before, in the journal beneath the crystal tree. The contamination was no longer trapped inside the mountain. It had already begun moving through people. Severin saw the same signs and frowned deeply. That wasn't happening yesterday. Aldrin nodded once. Because yesterday the breach was smaller. For the first time genuine concern overpowered Severin's confidence. He turned toward the followers surrounding him. Several more now displayed faint silver lines beneath their skin. They looked confused rather than frightened, touching their arms as the strange pattern slowly brightened. The sentinel emerged from the mine entrance behind Aldrin, its towering form casting a long shadow across the valley. "Contamination vectors expanding exponentially," it declared.
Recommended response, immediate global quarantine. Lyra looked from the Guardian to the thousands of people scattered across the mountainside. You can't quarantine the world.
Correction, the Sentinel replied. Historical records indicate previous civilizations attempted exactly that.
Mara swallowed hard. And no attempt succeeded.
A distant scream echoed from beyond the western ridge. Then another answered from the south. Birds burst into the sky in frightened flocks. Even from miles away they could see strange columns of silver light rising one after another on the horizon, each marking another place where the invisible contamination had surfaced.
Aldrin slowly closed the ancient journal in his hands.
He had spent decades believing he was preserving the last fragments of a forgotten tradition.
Now he understood the truth was far larger and infinitely more dangerous.
He was not the last guardian of fading magic. He was the last witness to a warning the world had already begun forgetting for a second time, and the catastrophe his predecessors had sacrificed themselves to delay had finally returned. The first instinct among the gathered people was not courage but confusion, and Aldrin recognized that as a blessing. Panic spread faster than any plague because it invited imagination to invent horrors before reality had time to reveal them. The silver veins creeping beneath the skin of Severin's followers remained faint, little more than shimmering threads beneath wrists and necks, yet every frightened glance made them seem more sinister. Children clung to parents who no longer knew whether to comfort them or hide their own fear. The Sentinel watched without visible emotion, though tiny adjustments rippled across its crystalline armor as countless ancient calculations unfolded within its silent mind. Severin knelt beside the elderly woman who had collapsed. He placed 2 fingers against her temple, closed his eyes, and attempted the same calming enchantment he had used on dozens of frightened minds before.
Nothing happened. Instead, the silver lines brightened. He withdrew his hand immediately.
It rejected me, he murmured. Aldrin heard him despite the distance.
It isn't a spell, he called. You can't command it. Severin rose slowly. Then what is it? Aldrin looked toward the broken mountain where the ancient breach remained hidden beyond layers of stone. A conversation. Lyra frowned. That doesn't explain anything. Not yet. Before anyone could press him further, another of Severin's followers stumbled. This time a young blacksmith dropped to one knee, staring in bewilderment at his own hands as tiny crystals emerged beneath his fingernails like frost spreading across glass. "Help me," the man whispered. His wife rushed toward him, but Aldrin shouted sharply, "Don't touch him." She froze only inches away, tears streaming down her face. "He's my husband." "I know." "Then tell me how to save him." Aldrin hurried across the valley. Instead of reaching for the afflicted man, he planted his staff into the earth between husband and wife. Pale rings of light spread outward across the ground. The silver crystals stopped growing. They did not disappear, but they paused, as though listening. Aldrin crouched beside the blacksmith. "Can you hear me?" The man nodded weakly. "What do you hear besides my voice?" The blacksmith blinked several times. "Water." "There isn't any." "Water here." "I know." His breathing steadied. "It's singing." Aldrin exchanged a troubled glance with the Sentinel. "Not singing," the Guardian corrected. "Resonance." The blacksmith squeezed his eyes shut. "It keeps asking the same question." Aldrin leaned closer. "What question?" The man's expression shifted from fear to puzzlement. "It wants to know why we're afraid of being changed." Silence settled over everyone within earshot. Severin slowly straightened, absorbing every word. Mara folded her arms tightly across her chest as if resisting a chill no one else could feel. Lyra watched Aldrin carefully. She had traveled with him long enough to recognize the difference between uncertainty and recognition. He had heard that question before. "You know what this is," she said quietly. Aldrin remained silent for several seconds before answering. The oldest records described it as the echo beyond form. That doesn't help. Because nobody truly understood it. He looked toward the fractured mountain. Imagine intelligence without a body. Awareness without birth or death.
A presence that never evolved the way living creatures did because it existed before life required evolution. When early mages reached too deeply into magic, they didn't discover another kingdom or another dimension. They made contact with this. Lyra stared at him.
Is it evil? Aldrin answered immediately. I don't know.
The honesty of the response unsettled her more than certainty would have. Severin approached until the two mages stood only a few feet apart. You spent years warning against reckless magic, he said.
Yet even you cannot tell us what we're facing.
Because my order destroyed most of its own knowledge.
Out of fear?
Out of responsibility.
Severin looked toward the distant columns of silver light climbing into the sky. Responsibility has left us blind. Before Aldrin could respond, the blacksmith gasped.
The silver beneath his skin retreated as quickly as it had appeared, leaving no wound behind.
He looked at his hands in astonishment. It's gone. His wife embraced him despite Aldrin's earlier warning. Nothing happened.
Around the valley others noticed their own silver markings fading as well.
Murmurs of relief spread through the crowd. Several people laughed nervously. Someone even applauded.
Lyra released a breath she had not realized she was holding.
Maybe it's over. Aldrin did not smile. No.
How can you be sure?
Because it learned.
The words barely left his mouth before every bird in the valley erupted into flight simultaneously. Thousands of wings filled the sky in frantic silence.
No cries escaped them.
They flew without making a single sound.
Even the insects stopped buzzing.
The wind vanished. Every leaf hung motionless on its branch. The world became so unnaturally quiet that the beating of individual hearts seemed loud enough to hear. Then every person present, without exception, heard a voice. It did not enter through their ears. It emerged inside their own thoughts, speaking in the familiar tones of loved ones, strangers, children, old friends, whoever each mind trusted most. The message was identical.
We remember you now.
Several people screamed. Others fell to their knees clutching their heads. Mara staggered backward against the mine entrance, eyes wide with disbelief.
Lyra instinctively drew both knives despite having no enemy she could see.
Even Severin winced as one hand rose to his temple.
Aldrin alone remained standing without visible reaction.
He slowly closed his eyes.
Do not answer, he said firmly. Don't think words back. Don't argue. Don't ask questions. A frightened boy cried, How do you stop thinking? Aldrin had no chance to reply because the mountains answered instead. Deep beneath the earth something immense shifted. Entire cliffs groaned. Snow cascaded from distant peaks though no avalanche had been triggered.
The ground trembled with deliberate rhythm rather than chaotic violence.
One pulse. Then another.
Then another, each separated by exactly the same interval. The sentinels suddenly turned toward the eastern horizon.
Additional seals compromised. Mara looked up sharply. Additional? 7 originally existed.
Lyra's face drained of color.
How many are left? The Guardian paused. After current breach.
Its glowing eyes dimmed momentarily.
3.
Severin whispered a curse under his breath.
Aldrin gripped his staff more tightly. Where? Locations classified. The keepers are gone.
Protocol remains unchanged.
Aldrin stepped closer. If we cannot reach them, every civilization dies.
The sentinel's head tilted slightly as though reconsidering ancient instructions that had never anticipated a world with only one surviving keeper.
After several long seconds it spoke. Protocol amendment authorized. Tiny crystal plates shifted across its chest.
Hidden compartments opened, revealing a sphere of white light suspended within layers of transparent crystal. Thin beams projected into the air, forming a breathtaking map of the
continent unlike anything drawn by human hands. Rivers glowed blue. Mountains shimmered silver. Hundreds of cities appeared as tiny points of amber light. Then 3 brilliant white stars emerged in distant regions far beyond any borders recognized by modern kingdoms. One rested beneath an endless desert. Another lay deep within an island chain surrounded by violent seas. The last pulsed beneath a forest so dense that even the projected image struggled to reveal its interior. Remaining seals, the sentinel announced. Every eye fixed upon the glowing map. Aldrin immediately understood the impossible scale of the task. Each location lay weeks apart under ideal conditions. They no longer had weeks.
As if confirming the thought, one of the amber lights representing a city suddenly flickered silver before disappearing entirely.
Then another. Then a third. Mara whispered, "Those are real places." The sentinel answered, "Current population status unknown." Lyra stared at the fading lights. "We can't travel to all 3.
Severin slowly looked from the map to Aldrin. Neither man spoke for several moments because the same conclusion had reached them both at exactly the same time.
Finally Severin broke the silence. "We divide." Lyra looked at him in disbelief. "You expect us to trust you?"
Severin met her gaze steadily.
"No. I expect you to recognize arithmetic." He pointed toward the map. "One group cannot reach every seal before the contamination spreads."
"Whether you believe my methods are monstrous is irrelevant if the world ends while we argue."
Aldrin studied the glowing projection.
Every instinct warned him against placing responsibility in Severin's hands.
Yet every calculation reached the same answer. Refusing would guarantee failure.
"Who goes where?" he asked.
Severin pointed toward the island chain. "My followers know the eastern coasts. We can reach the sea first."
Mara immediately shook her head.
"Those islands are filled with ruins older than recorded history. You'll need someone who understands ancient machinery." Severin nodded. "Then come with us."
She hesitated. Lyra expected an argument, but instead Mara surprised everyone.
"Fine."
She looked directly at Aldrin.
"I don't trust him."
Then she turned toward Severin.
"I don't trust you either." Severin almost smiled. "That makes cooperation simpler." Aldrin faced the projection again.
The desert seal radiated faintly, surrounded by shifting patterns that resembled moving dunes.
The forest seal pulsed unevenly, almost as though struggling to remain visible. "Lyra," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You choose." "Choose what?" "Which road you travel." She blinked in surprise. "You're asking me?" "Yes."
She stared at the map for a long time. Every sensible instinct urged her to stay beside Aldrin. She had survived impossible dangers because of his guidance. Separating now felt reckless. Yet another thought slowly replaced that fear. For weeks she had watched him insist that every person deserved the freedom to make meaningful decisions. If she refused simply because she feared making the wrong one, she would betray everything she had begun to admire in him. She exhaled slowly. "The forest." Aldrin nodded once. "Then we go there together." Severin extended his hand across the glowing map. "Until the seals are secured." Aldrin looked at the offered hand. Their philosophies remained fundamentally opposed. Their trust remained fragile at best. Yet the silver lights representing distant cities continued disappearing one after another while they stood debating the future. At last Aldrin clasped Severin's forearm. "Until the seals are secured," he agreed. High above them the unnatural silence finally broke. Thunder rolled across a cloudless sky, but it was unlike any thunder born from storms. It sounded deeper, older, carrying an echo that seemed to come from beneath the earth rather than above it. Every person present instinctively looked upward, though the source lay far below their feet, and for a single impossible instant the sunlight itself shimmered as if the entire world had become the surface of a vast lake disturbed by an unseen hand. No one moved immediately after the shimmering faded because every instinct urged them to determine whether what they had witnessed had truly happened or whether the unseen presence had somehow reached into their perceptions once again. The silence that followed carried a different weight than fear. It was the silence of people realizing the familiar rules of their world could no longer be trusted. The sky regained its ordinary blue, birds cautiously returned to the branches, and a cool breeze finally crossed the valley, stirring grass that moments earlier had hung perfectly still. Yet something subtle had changed. Aldrin noticed it first. Magic itself no longer flowed with its accustomed rhythm. For decades he had sensed it as naturally as breathing, an invisible current threading through stone, water, wind, and every living thing. Now that current hesitated, as though listening for distant instructions. He lowered his gaze toward the earth beneath his boots and quietly whispered, "It has begun waking the old pathways." Lyra looked at him. "Can that be stopped?" Aldrin answered after a long pause. "I don't know. But it can still be delayed." The sentinel folded the glowing map back into the crystal sphere within its chest. Thin plates of armor slid together until no seam remained. Delay probability increases if expedition departs within 1 hour. Mara immediately began shouting orders to the families who had been helping her in the workshops. Her voice, once reserved for discussing gears and measurements, became sharp and efficient. Pack only essential tools. Leave unfinished constructs. Fill every water barrel. Bring spare axles, not furniture. Several people protested. One young apprentice pointed toward rows of intricate mechanical companions. "We spent years building them." Mara did not soften her tone. "If we're alive later, we'll build better ones." The apprentice looked heartbroken but obeyed. Across the valley Severin gathered his followers without using enchantment. Aldrin noticed the difference immediately. Instead of directing minds through magic, Severin spoke plainly. "Some of you will remain here with the Sentinel. Others will travel with me. No one is required to come." A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "If we stay, what happens?" Severin looked honestly uncertain. "You help protect everyone who cannot travel. And if we leave? You may never return." She nodded thoughtfully before choosing to remain. One by one others made their own decisions. Not everyone chose the same path. Aldrin watched quietly. Perhaps Severin had finally understood that willing loyalty carried more strength than compelled obedience. Perhaps necessity had simply forced him to adapt. Either way, something within the dark-robed mage had shifted. Lyra prepared their horses while sorting through supplies with the practical precision that had kept her alive on dangerous roads. She discarded nearly half of what others insisted was necessary. "You'll thank me after the third mountain," she muttered whenever someone questioned her choices. Aldrin packed little beyond food, blankets, the ancient journal, and a small leather pouch whose contents he never revealed. Before leaving, he returned alone to the chamber beyond the broken seal. The crystal tree still stood in silent ruin beneath the fractured ceiling. The skeleton of Edris rested exactly as before. Aldrin knelt once more beside the remains. "I wish I could ask what you would do now," he said softly. Naturally, no answer came. Yet as he prepared to leave, something caught his attention. One branch of the crystal tree reflected light differently from the others. He approached cautiously. Embedded within the translucent crystal rested a tiny object scarcely larger than a fingernail. Using the tip of his staff, he carefully freed it. It was a seed unlike any he had ever seen, perfectly clear, containing what appeared to be a single droplet of golden light suspended inside. The moment it touched his palm, warmth spread through his hand. The ancient journal suddenly slipped from beneath his arm and fell open by itself. A page he had not previously noticed shimmered into visibility. Most of the writing remained faded, but one sentence appeared with startling clarity. "When the branches fall, carry the final seed to living soil, for endings that survive become beginnings." Aldrin stared at the words for several moments before carefully placing the crystal seed into the hidden pouch. He did not yet understand its purpose, but Edris had clearly expected someone to find it long after the seal failed. Outside the mountain, the two expeditions gathered near the valley road.
Severin approached Aldrin holding a folded piece of parchment.
"One of my scouts brought this yesterday," he said.
"I think it belongs with you." Aldrin unfolded it. The map showed an enormous forest stretching across the eastern frontier.
Someone had added handwritten notes marking unusual disappearances, abandoned villages, and places where travelers reported hearing voices despite finding no one nearby. Near the center of the map, a single word had been written repeatedly in different inks, as though multiple investigators had reached the same conclusion across many years.
Hollow Root.
"You've been studying this place for a long time," Aldrin observed.
Severin nodded. "Long before I knew about the seals." "Why didn't you go yourself?" Severin looked toward the distant tree line visible beyond the hills. "Everyone I sent came back remembering the forest differently." Lyra frowned. "Differently how?"
"One claimed there were no trees at all, only cliffs. Another insisted the forest was underwater. A third remembered spending 6 months there even though he returned after 9 days.
Aldrin carefully folded the map. Memory distortion. Or reality distortion.
Severin shrugged slightly.
"I stopped guessing."
Mara emerged leading a wagon pulled by 2 powerful draft horses. Behind it rolled several compact machines whose wheels turned without animals. She noticed Lyra staring. "Spring-driven assistants," Mara explained with obvious pride. "They'll handle steep hills better than horses." Lyra walked around one of the devices, examining polished brass gears hidden beneath reinforced wooden panels.
"You built these?" 5 years of experiments." Mara patted the machine affectionately. "Please don't let them explode."
"They explode?"
"Only twice." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Comforting." Despite everything, Aldrin smiled.
Small moments of ordinary conversation reminded him that humanity had not yet surrendered to despair.
Those moments mattered. Before the group separated, the sentinel spoke once more. "Keeper Aldrin." "Yes?" "Additional protocol unlocked." A narrow compartment opened along its forearm. Inside rested a slender crystal cylinder no longer than a finger. "Communication relay." Aldrin accepted it carefully. "How does it work?"
"When activated, remaining relays resonate across continental distance."
Severin frowned. "Remaining?" "Originally 7. The Guardian paused. "Current operational estimate, unknown." Aldrin slipped the relay into another pocket. "We'll find out." The farewell between the two expeditions proved unexpectedly brief. No speeches promised certain victory because none would have believed them. No dramatic declarations attempted to erase the uncertainty hanging over every decision. Severin simply inclined his head toward Aldrin. "Try not to die." Aldrin answered with the faintest smile. "The same advice applies." Lyra mounted her horse. That was almost friendly. Severin looked at her. "Don't exaggerate."
Then the groups turned toward different horizons.
For the next 4 days Aldrin and Lyra traveled almost without interruption. The land gradually changed as they moved eastward. Rolling hills surrendered to thick woodlands where ancient oaks blocked much of the sunlight. Streams flowed in unexpected directions, occasionally climbing gently uphill before disappearing beneath moss-covered rocks. Deer watched travelers from impossible distances without fleeing.
Once they encountered a flock of white wolves drinking peacefully beside sheep while neither species showed the slightest fear of the other.
"That's wrong," Lyra whispered. "Very." Aldrin dismounted to examine the stream.
The water reflected not the trees above but unfamiliar stars scattered across a violet sky.
When he cupped some into his hand it appeared perfectly ordinary again. "Do not drink from running water here," he said. "Why?" "Because I don't know where it believes it is."
That night they camped beneath enormous branches draped with silver moss.
Lyra volunteered to keep first watch while Aldrin rested. Hours passed quietly.
She listened to insects, distant owls, and leaves rustling overhead. Eventually fatigue crept into her muscles. She rubbed her eyes and looked toward the fire.
Someone sat across from her.
She instantly reached for a knife before recognizing the face. It was her younger brother, exactly as he had looked the last summer before drowning. His clothes were damp. River water dripped from his sleeves. Yet he smiled with effortless warmth. "You look older," he said. Lyra stood so abruptly the log behind her toppled over. She did not speak. She simply stared. "You're getting slow," he teased. "You would have beaten me climbing the cliffs when we were kids." Her hands trembled violently. "You're dead."
"I know." His tone held neither sadness nor accusation. "Does that matter here?"
She remembered Aldrin's warning inside the observatory weeks earlier. Do not trust voices shaped by regret. She took one step backward.
"You're not him."
The figure tilted its head.
"Then tell me something only he would know."
Lyra's throat tightened. Memories flooded back with painful clarity. "When we stole apples from old Bren's orchard." The figure laughed before she finished. "You blamed the dog." Tears filled her eyes because the memory was correct. "When Mother found the broken fishing rod." "You said you dropped it." "I said lightning hit it." Again correct. Every answer arrived instantly. Every smile matched perfectly. "You remember everything," Lyra whispered. "Because you do." The figure rose slowly. "Come with me." He extended his hand. Beyond him the darkness between the trees shimmered strangely, revealing the outline of a familiar riverside cottage that had burned down nearly 20 years earlier. Warm light glowed through its windows. She could hear laughter inside. Her mother's voice. Her father's deep chuckle. Dishes clinking against a wooden table. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the cool night air so vividly that her stomach tightened with forgotten longing. One step. That was all it would take. One step toward the home she had mourned for half her life. Behind her Aldrin's voice broke the spell without rising above a whisper. "If you walk there, I cannot bring you back." Lyra did not turn around. She kept staring at the cottage, tears streaming freely now. "It feels real." "I know. It remembers everything." "No," Aldrin answered gently. "It remembers everything you wish had happened." The figure wearing her brother's face still held out his hand. His smile never faltered. "You don't have to keep hurting," he said softly. "You've carried enough." Lyra closed her eyes. Every part of her wanted to believe him. Every lonely mile she had traveled, every cold night, every dangerous road suddenly seemed unnecessary if one impossible step could restore what had been lost. Then another memory surfaced, one no comforting illusion could erase. The last real thing her brother had ever shouted before the river carried him away had not been a plea for rescue. It had been a command. Run. He had chosen her life over his own in the final seconds they shared. The person before her offered escape instead. Her real brother never would have done that. She opened her eyes, drew one knife, and threw it directly at the smiling figure. The blade passed through him like sunlight through mist. The cottage shattered into drifting fragments of pale light. The familiar voices vanished. Only dark trees remained, swaying quietly in the night breeze. Lyra dropped to her knees, breathing hard. Aldrin walked over without speaking. He simply sat beside her while the fire crackled softly between them. After several minutes she wiped her face and managed a tired laugh. "That forest fights unfairly." Aldrin nodded. "The most dangerous enemies usually do." Far beyond the camp, hidden among the ancient trees where neither traveler could see, countless tiny lights blinked awake one after another, stretching through the endless forest like stars descending to the earth, and deep. Beneath tangled roots something that had not opened its eyes since the age before kingdoms slowly became aware that the last white-robed mage was coming. Dawn arrived without sunrise. Instead of golden light spilling naturally across the horizon, the forest brightened evenly from every direction until shadows simply ceased to exist. Lyra noticed it while tightening the saddle on her horse. She looked beneath the animal and frowned.
Where did the shadow go? Aldrin glanced downward. The horse stood upon ordinary grass, yet no outline stretched beneath its body.
He raised one hand toward the pale sky. Sunlight still filtered through the canopy, but it seemed unable to choose a single direction.
We're closer than I expected, he said quietly. Closer to what?
A place where the world forgot how it was supposed to behave. They resumed their journey along a trail that appeared well-traveled despite being swallowed by roots older than cities. Every few miles they discovered signs that someone had attempted to mark the route with carved symbols, only to find each carving weathered away while the surrounding bark remained untouched. At midday they reached a stream crossing marked by 3 standing stones. The center stone bore a deep vertical crack filled with vibrant green moss.
As Aldrin approached, the crack slowly sealed itself until the stone appeared untouched. Lyra rubbed her eyes. Did you see that?
Yes.
Should stones heal? No.
Good. I was beginning to worry I'd stopped recognizing impossible things.
Aldrin knelt beside the stream.
Unlike the strange waters they had encountered earlier, this one reflected the forest exactly as expected.
He dipped 2 fingers into the current.
Ripples spread outward, but instead of fading they continued expanding far beyond the stream itself. Every tree within sight shivered at precisely the same moment. Hundreds of leaves detached from their branches simultaneously, swirling upward rather than falling.
Lyra instinctively reached for her bow. We're not alone. No, Aldrin agreed. We've been observed since dawn.
A clear voice echoed through the trees before either traveler could locate its source.
Longer than that.
A young woman stepped from behind one of the standing stones, though neither Aldrin nor Lyra had seen anyone standing there moments earlier. She appeared no older than 25, with dark braided hair streaked unexpectedly by narrow strands of silver despite her youth. She wore a deep green cloak woven from countless shades of forest moss and carried a walking staff carved from a single twisted branch. Around her wrists tiny wooden charms clicked softly together whenever she moved. She looked first at Lyra, then at Aldrin, and finally smiled with unmistakable amusement.
You arrived 3 days late. Lyra blinked. We've never been here before.
You have. The stranger tilted her head.
You simply remember a different version. Lyra looked toward Aldrin.
Please tell me she's speaking nonsense.
I hope she is. The woman laughed warmly. Hope has become rare visitors bring with them. She bowed slightly. My name is Elian. Aldrin returned the gesture. You know who I am.
The forest told me.
The forest speaks? Constantly.
She smiled at Lyra.
Most people just spend too much time listening to themselves. Lyra folded her arms.
Trees don't have conversations. Elian casually rested her palm against the nearest oak. The branches above them immediately bent downward, forming a graceful arch across the trail. Tiny white blossoms opened along limbs that had carried only leaves moments earlier.
Elian shrugged. Sometimes they're shy. Lyra stared upward. I owe several people apologies. Elian's smile broadened. That usually happens here. She led them deeper into the woods without explaining where they were going.
The path changed constantly beneath their feet.
Rocks shifted positions. Fallen logs quietly rolled aside before anyone reached them. Birds flew ahead as though guiding the travelers while squirrels darted between branches carrying bright
red berries they carefully placed beside the trail.
Lyra eventually stopped questioning every impossible sight because there were simply too many. After several hours she noticed something stranger than all the rest. There aren't any dead trees. Elian nodded approvingly. Good observation. Storms never knock them down? Sometimes. Disease? Occasionally. Then where are they?
Elian rested her hand upon an enormous cedar whose trunk measured wider than a house.
Nothing dies here alone. As she spoke, a section of bark slowly opened like a flower blooming.
Within the living wood rested the fallen trunk of another tree, completely enclosed yet untouched by decay.
Tiny green shoots emerged from its surface, drawing nourishment from the surrounding giant. Lyra approached in silent amazement. The forest buries its own? Not berries. Elian gently corrected. Remembers. Aldrin watched thoughtfully. Life feeding life. Elian looked at him with renewed interest. Your order understood more than I expected. Not enough. They arrived before sunset at a village unlike any Lyra had ever imagined. Homes had not been built by cutting away the forest but by carefully guiding living trees into graceful shapes over generations. Great branches intertwined to form roofs. Hollow trunks became warm rooms filled with polished wooden furniture that still carried the scent of fresh leaves. Bridges of woven vines connected elevated walkways high above the ground while streams flowed directly beneath homes before continuing naturally through gardens overflowing with herbs and wildflowers. Children chased glowing insects without trying to catch them. Elderly men and women carved musical instruments beneath enormous roots while birds perched calmly upon their shoulders. No walls surrounded the settlement. No watchtowers overlooked the paths. Nothing suggested fear of invasion. No defenses, Lyra observed. Many, Elian replied. Just none that resemble yours. Villagers greeted Elian warmly before noticing Aldrin. Conversation gradually quieted. Faces filled with surprise, then uncertainty, then something close to reverence. An old woman carrying woven baskets slowly approached. She studied Aldrin's white robe for a long moment before lifting trembling fingers toward the fabric. I thought the stories had ended, she whispered. Aldrin bowed respectfully. Some are slower than others. Tears filled the woman's eyes. My grandmother said a white robe would return when the roots began dreaming again. Aldrin looked toward Elian. She offered no explanation. Instead she quietly said, Come. Someone has waited a very long time. At the center of the village stood a tree unlike any Aldrin had ever seen. Its trunk measured nearly 50 feet across, disappearing upward into branches so vast they formed an entire forest canopy by themselves. Sunlight filtered through leaves shimmering with faint traces of gold. The air beneath those branches felt warmer, calmer, filled with a quiet vitality that eased tired muscles without anyone noticing. Built into the enormous trunk was a circular doorway. Elian entered first. Inside, the living wood formed a vast chamber illuminated by soft amber light flowing through natural veins beneath the bark. Seated beside a shallow pool was an elderly man whose beard reached nearly to his waist. His back remained perfectly straight despite obvious age, and his eyes shone with startling clarity. Before Aldrin could introduce himself, the old man chuckled. You're taller than your teacher was. Aldrin stopped. You knew Master Corrin? He cheated at chess. No one ever beat him. I did. The old man's smile became positively mischievous. Twice. Aldrin knelt respectfully. Then you are called Rowan these days. You're impossible. Rowan laughed heartily. That's what Corrin used to say. Lyra looked between them in complete confusion. Would someone explain why this impossible man knows a teacher who died before either of us were born? Rowan answered cheerfully. Because I was already old when he arrived. Lyra slowly turned toward Aldrin. How old is he? Aldrin hesitated. Rowan answered for him. 912. Lyra waited for someone to laugh. No one did. She sighed. I've stopped asking what's possible. Rowan gestured toward cushions surrounding the pool. A healthy decision. Once everyone settled, Rowan's expression gradually became more serious. You seek the second route. Aldrin nodded. The forest seal. Names change. Rowan looked into the still water before him. Its purpose does not. Aldrin removed Edris's journal from his pack and carefully placed it beside the pool. Rowan's weathered hands trembled slightly as he touched the ancient leather. He succeeded, the old guardian whispered. For a time. He opened the journal to several pages Aldrin had been unable to read. To Lyra's astonishment, the faded ink slowly darkened until every word became visible. Rowan looked up. The journal remembers me.
Aldrin leaned forward.
Can you read it?
Rowan nodded once, his eyes moving steadily across the restored text.
The silence lasted many minutes. Finally he closed the book with visible sorrow. Worse than I feared. Tell us. Rowan looked first at Lyra, then Aldrin.
The seals were never intended to imprison the Echo.
Aldrin frowned. Then what? Rowan tapped the ancient journal. To protect it. Neither traveler spoke. Rowan continued quietly. Imagine discovering a child unlike anything your people had ever known.
That child possesses unimaginable power but no understanding of pain, kindness, time, death, or consequence. Every careless movement reshapes mountains. Every curious thought changes rivers. Would you call the child evil? Aldrin answered slowly. No. Would you leave it unsupervised? Certainly not. Rowan nodded. The Echo arrived in our world before humanity learned language. It explored existence the only way it could, by changing whatever fascinated it. Lyra stared in disbelief. You're saying this thing isn't invading us? Rowan's eyes met hers. From its perspective, it has always lived here.
The realization settled over the room like cold rain. Aldrin finally understood why the ancient records had never described battles. There had been no war between humanity and the Echo because war required shared understanding.
Humanity had interpreted the changes as destruction.
The Echo had interpreted them as discovery. Rowan rose slowly and walked toward the enormous living wall of the tree.
He placed both palms against the bark. Instantly the entire chamber brightened. Faint images appeared within the wood itself, moving like memories trapped beneath the surface.
Lyra watched in astonishment as ancient scenes unfolded.
She saw primitive humans standing beside impossible crystalline landscapes while luminous shapes drifted peacefully overhead. She saw forests growing across deserts within minutes. Oceans quietly changing color. Creatures unlike any living today walking beside early villages without fear. Then the images shifted. Humans built tools. Then weapons. Mages learned to direct magic. Brilliant towers rose across continents. The luminous shapes approached curiously, only to be attacked by frightened sorcerers who mistook curiosity for aggression. The first great battle erupted not because either side sought conquest but because neither understood the other's intentions. Rowan lowered his hands. The visions faded. Fear began the tragedy, he said softly. Every generation inherited only half the story. Aldrin stood in thoughtful silence. Then sealing the Echo. Rowan nodded sadly. Was like locking away a child after teaching it that everyone hated it. No one spoke for several moments. Even Lyra, who rarely remained silent for long, found herself unable to form words. Finally Aldrin broke the stillness. If that's true, opening the seals completely could still destroy civilization. Yes. Rowan agreed. And keeping them closed forever will also destroy civilization. Lyra looked between them. Those can't both be true. Rowan smiled sadly. Sometimes history leaves only difficult roads. Before anyone could continue, the ground beneath the great tree shuddered so violently that water splashed from the pool. Outside, voices shouted in alarm. Elian rushed through the doorway, breathing hard. Rowan! Where? The old guardian asked immediately. The southern roots. Rowan's face paled. Already? Elian nodded. They're turning to crystal. Aldrin seized his staff. Show us. Together they hurried from the chamber. Villagers were already running toward the southern edge of the settlement where the roots of the enormous tree disappeared into the earth. As Aldrin arrived, he saw the impossible with his own eyes. One of the massive roots, thicker than a castle tower, had begun transforming into translucent silver crystal inch by inch. The change advanced steadily through living wood without fire, decay, or violence. Leaves high above started losing their green color. Birds abandoned branches in frantic waves.
Rowan touched the crystallizing root, and for the first time in centuries the old guardian's hands shook with unmistakable fear.
It found the heart tree, he whispered.
And if the roots stop living?
Elian finished the sentence in a voice barely audible over the frightened cries surrounding them. The forest will forget how to stay alive. A heavy stillness settled over the gathered villagers as they stared at the spreading crystal. No one rushed forward with axes or buckets because every instinct recognized the futility of ordinary solutions. The transformation advanced with terrifying patience, not in sudden bursts but in steady, deliberate inches, each heartbeat claiming another section of living wood. Leaves detached from the nearest branches and drifted downward without the slightest breeze, turning silver before they touched the ground. When they landed, they dissolved into glittering dust that vanished moments later as though the forest itself refused to remember them.
Rowan remained kneeling beside the root.
He pressed both palms against the bark and closed his eyes. The amber glow within the heart tree brightened until the entire trunk shone like a lantern visible through layers of living wood. For a brief moment the advancing crystal slowed. The villagers exhaled in cautious relief. Then a sharp crack echoed through the root. Rowan staggered backward, blood running from one nostril.
Elian caught him before he fell. Enough, she pleaded. You'll kill yourself. Rowan wiped the blood away with surprising calm. Not today.
Aldrin stepped beside the root and examined the crystalline surface closely.
Within its transparent depths tiny points of light drifted slowly, almost like stars moving through an endless night sky.
They did not appear hostile. They appeared curious. He reached out with one finger. Lyra grabbed his wrist immediately.
Absolutely not. Aldrin looked at her. I need to understand it. Find another way. Rowan studied the root thoughtfully before speaking. He may be right. Lyra stared at both men in disbelief.
Have either of you developed a habit of surviving impossible situations by touching the dangerous thing?
Rowan smiled faintly. More often than I recommend.
Aldrin gently freed his hand from hers.
If anything changes, pull me away. You'll probably be crystal by then.
Then pull harder. Before Lyra could argue again, Aldrin rested his fingertips against the transformed root. Cold spread through his hand instantly, but it was unlike ordinary cold. It carried no pain. Instead it emptied sensation completely, erasing warmth, weight, even the awareness of his own heartbeat. The world around him dissolved.
He no longer stood beside the heart tree. He floated within an immense ocean of shimmering light stretching farther than sight could reach.
There was no ground beneath him and no sky above, only endless currents flowing through translucent colors beyond any name he knew.
Countless luminous forms drifted peacefully through the vastness. Some resembled spirals.
Others unfolded like flowers made from moonlight. A few shifted constantly between shapes, becoming birds, rivers, mountains, and stars within the span of a single breath. None possessed faces, yet Aldrin sensed attention turning toward him from every direction at once. The feeling held neither hunger nor malice. It resembled the fascination of children discovering an unfamiliar creature. A gentle pulse rippled through the luminous sea. Then another. Without words, meaning reached him directly. You returned. Aldrin struggled to respond. Thought itself felt strangely difficult here, as though language had become too small to contain intention. I have never been here before. The currents paused. Then countless tiny lights gathered together, weaving themselves into the outline of a human figure formed entirely from silver radiance. It tilted its head. You have changed shape. Understanding struck him with startling clarity. Whatever intelligence surrounded him did not perceive individuals as humans understood them. It recognized patterns, continuity, echoes across immense stretches of time. To it, Aldrin carried traces of every white-robed mage who had ever touched the seals. The order itself appeared as one continuing presence rather than generations of separate lives. Another pulse reached him. The others became quiet. We waited.
Aldrin searched for the right thought. The others died.
Silence spread across the luminous expanse.
Not grief. Confusion. The concept seemed unfamiliar. The figure dissolved into drifting threads before reforming. Why? Aldrin's chest tightened. How could anyone explain mortality to a being that apparently had never experienced it? Living things end. The response echoed outward. Thousands of luminous forms slowed their endless drifting. Why? Again the same innocent question. Aldrin realized with growing astonishment that the echo genuinely did not understand death.
Not because it denied it, but because nothing in its existence resembled such an ending.
Because time changes us. Time changes everything. Not forever. Another long pause followed.
Then the luminous figure extended something resembling a hand toward him.
We tried changing that. Memories erupted around Aldrin without warning. He saw forests restored after wildfires within moments.
Broken bones knitting together beneath shimmering light. Rivers redirected away from starving villages. Oceans clearing themselves of poison. Creatures reshaped to survive changing climates. Everywhere the echo had altered the world, it had believed it was helping life endure. Then the memories darkened.
Humans screamed as familiar landscapes transformed overnight. Families became separated when entire mountain ranges shifted. Crops vanished because seasons no longer followed predictable rhythms. Panic became violence. Violence became retaliation. Retaliation became war. Aldrin understood the ancient catastrophe from an entirely new perspective.
Both sides had acted according to truths the other could not comprehend. The vision dissolved.
Why did they become afraid? The echo asked. Aldrin answered with painful honesty.
Because they could not choose the changes.
Another silence. Longer this time. Then a response unlike any before.
Choice. The word lingered uncertainly, explored like an unfamiliar object turned over in curious hands.
Explain. Far away, beyond the strange communion, Aldrin dimly heard Lyra's voice shouting his name. He realized only seconds had passed outside despite what felt like hours here. He concentrated carefully. Imagine someone changing you without asking. The luminous figure shimmered. We become many shapes. Imagine being forced into one you do not want. The current slowed almost imperceptibly.
Around them countless other luminous forms drifted closer.
Why refuse a better shape?
Aldrin thought of villages, friendships, grief, joy, every flawed and fragile experience that gave human lives meaning precisely because they were chosen rather than imposed. Because becoming better means nothing if it is not your own decision. The ocean of light grew astonishingly still.
Every current halted.
Every luminous shape ceased drifting. It felt as though an entire civilization had stopped breathing to consider one unfamiliar idea. Then the connection shattered.
Aldrin stumbled backward into the ordinary world, collapsing to one knee beside the heart tree. Lyra caught him before he struck the ground.
"Stay with me," she shouted. His breathing came in ragged gasps.
Rowan leaned forward urgently. What did you see? Aldrin looked at the crystallized root.
The silver advance had stopped completely.
Not reversed. Simply stopped.
He managed a weak smile filled with equal parts wonder and sorrow.
It asked questions. Rowan froze. Questions? It doesn't understand us. Elian frowned. After all this time? No.
Aldrin slowly rose with Lyra's help.
After all this time.
The distinction settled heavily over everyone listening.
Rowan closed his eyes.
Then we've spent centuries preparing for an enemy that never existed.
Not exactly. Aldrin looked toward the distant forest where faint silver mist drifted between ancient trunks. Misunderstanding can still destroy the world.
Before Rowan could respond, a horn sounded from the northern edge of the village.
Not a warning horn. A greeting.
Villagers turned in surprise.
Few outsiders ever reached Hollowroot uninvited. Moments later, several scouts hurried into the clearing accompanied by 3 exhausted travelers.
One was a broad-shouldered woman in weathered armor carrying a broken spear.
Another, an elderly scholar with ink stains covering both sleeves despite the hardships of travel.
The third wore the blue cloak of a royal messenger, now torn almost beyond recognition.
All 3
looked as though they had crossed impossible distances without proper rest. The armored woman bowed quickly.
"Which of you is Aldrin?" "I am."
She removed a leather case from beneath her cloak.
"Then this belongs to you."
Inside rested another crystal relay identical to the one the sentinel had entrusted to him. Except this one had shattered almost completely. Only a single fragment remained intact, still pulsing faintly with white light.
Aldrin accepted it carefully. "Where did you find this?"
The scholar answered before the woman could speak.
"Not where."
"Who?" He swallowed hard.
"A man named Severin." Lyra stepped forward immediately. "What happened?" The messenger looked away before answering.
"His expedition reached the eastern coast 3 days ago."
Aldrin's expression tightened. "And?"
The scholar spoke softly. "They found the 3rd seal."
Relief flickered briefly across Aldrin's face.
"Good." The old man shook his head.
It was already open.
Every conversation in the clearing ceased. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move.
Lyra looked from one traveler to another. "Where is Severin now?"
The messenger removed a folded strip of dark cloth from inside the leather case. It was torn from the sleeve of Severin's robe. Burn marks blackened its edges. "He told us to find the last white robe," the messenger said quietly.
"He said."
The young man hesitated, struggling to repeat words that clearly still haunted him.
"Tell Aldrin I finally understand why victory was never the goal." Aldrin took the cloth without speaking. "Was he injured?" No one answered immediately.
The armored woman finally met his eyes.
"We never saw a body."
"Then he may still be alive." The scholar slowly shook his head. "Perhaps." He looked toward the shattered relay. "But after what emerged from the sea?" His voice trailed away.
Lyra stepped closer.
"Tell us everything." The old man stared at the distant trees as though seeing another coastline entirely.
"The islands didn't sink."
His hands trembled visibly. "They stood up." A ripple of disbelief spread through the gathered villagers. Rowan's normally serene expression hardened for the first time since Aldrin had arrived. "The living archipelago," he whispered.
Elian looked at him in alarm. "That's only a legend."
Rowan answered without taking his eyes from the broken relay.
"Not anymore." Aldrin slowly closed his hand around the torn fragment of Severin's robe.
Somewhere beyond the eastern horizon his unlikely ally had encountered a catastrophe unlike anything described in the surviving journals of the White Mantle, and whatever had awakened beneath those distant seas was now moving toward the mainland. The race to preserve the remaining seals had just become something far more desperate, because the world was no longer facing one ancient mystery awakening from beneath the earth. It was facing several, each remembering a different beginning. No one spoke for several moments after the projection vanished.
Even the forest seemed unwilling to disturb the silence.
The chorus of birds faded one voice at a time until only the gentle rustling of leaves remained, and the countless animals gathered around the heart tree continued standing perfectly still, their attention fixed not upon the people but upon the glowing sphere hidden within the ancient trunk.
Aldrin looked down at the crystal relay in his hand.
Its light had gone dark. Fine fractures now crossed its surface, branching outward from the center like frozen lightning. Whatever strength had carried Severin's message across unimaginable distance had consumed the device completely.
Rowan stepped beside him. Was that truly recorded? Aldrin turned the relay over carefully. No. Rowan's eyes narrowed. Then someone answered.
Lyra looked sharply toward him.
What do you mean? Aldrin slipped the broken relay into his robe.
Communication relays were designed to transmit living thought, not preserved memory.
Severin wasn't leaving us a message.
He looked toward the eastern horizon where the sea lay beyond countless miles of wilderness
and mountains.
He was trying to reach us.
Rowan inhaled slowly.
Then he may still be alive. Or he was alive only moments ago.
Neither possibility brought comfort. Elian watched the animals surrounding the village.
They've never gathered like this before. One of the elders approached cautiously.
Should we send them away? Rowan shook his head. Listen. Everyone fell quiet again.
Beneath the ordinary sounds of the forest, another rhythm gradually emerged. It was faint at first, little more than a steady pulse carried through the roots beneath the soil.
Then a second pulse answered from somewhere farther away. Then a third. Aldrin closed his eyes.
They're speaking.
Lyra rubbed her forehead.
I've reached the point where that sentence barely surprises me.
Rowan smiled briefly. Progress often feels uncomfortable. The pulses continued spreading through the ground, traveling outward in widening circles. Elian knelt and pressed one palm against the earth. Her expression changed almost immediately. The western groves are answering.
Another guardian standing nearby did the same.
The northern cliffs too. Rowan looked toward Aldrin. The forest is sending a warning. To whom? Lyra asked. Rowan answered softly. Everything that still remembers how to listen.
As though proving his words, distant howls echoed from deep within the woods. They were not cries of alarm but deliberate responses, passing the unseen message farther across the wilderness. High overhead, enormous flocks of birds suddenly rose from the canopy and wheeled eastward in vast spirals before separating into smaller groups that disappeared toward different horizons. Every living creature seemed to have accepted a responsibility no human had assigned.
Aldrin watched them with quiet admiration. We spent centuries believing civilization meant separating ourselves from nature. Rowan nodded. Nature never agreed.
Before anyone could continue, one of the village children tugged gently on Lyra's sleeve.
She looked down. A little boy of perhaps 8 years held out a smooth acorn. For your journey, he said. Lyra smiled. Thank you. Don't lose it.
His expression remained completely serious. It already knows where you need to go.
She looked at Rowan. Should I ask? Rowan chuckled. No. Accept gifts offered by children in forests. Understanding usually arrives later. Lyra tucked the acorn safely into a small pouch at her belt. The boy nodded with obvious satisfaction before running back toward his family. Preparations for departure resumed with renewed urgency. Rowan insisted on accompanying Aldrin despite repeated objections from nearly every elder.
Your place is here, one argued.
Rowan answered gently, my place has always been where the roots cannot reach. The elder looked confused. Rowan smiled. Today, that's everywhere else.
While horses were loaded and supplies arranged, Aldrin wandered once more beneath the great branches of the heart tree. He found Elian standing alone beside the crystallized root.
She rested one hand lightly upon its smooth surface.
It's quieter now, she said without turning around.
The echo? Aldrin asked. She nodded. Not silent. Curious. Aldrin joined her. It asked me about choice.
Elian smiled faintly.
It asked me about dreams. Dreams?
It wanted to know why we imagine things that don't exist.
Aldrin considered the question. What did you tell it? She laughed softly. I admitted I wasn't sure. The honesty pleased him. Sometimes uncertainty is the beginning of wisdom.
Elian glanced toward him.
Do you truly believe we can speak with it instead of fighting? Aldrin looked at the crystal spreading through the root.
I believe conversations are harder than battles.
That wasn't my question. He sighed quietly. No.
After a moment he continued. But I believe the attempt is worth more than another century of fear.
Elian nodded slowly. Then perhaps that's enough.
Just before noon the travelers gathered at the eastern edge of Hollowroot.
Rowan carried only a small pack despite the immense age suggested by his appearance. The wooden chest containing the memory seeds hung securely across Aldrin's back. Lyra checked the straps one final time before swinging into the saddle.
"Ready?" she asked.
Aldrin looked once toward the heart tree.
Sunlight filtered through its golden leaves, illuminating the crystal sphere hidden within the trunk. For an instant he thought he saw the tiny sapling of light inside lean ever so slightly toward the east, as though watching them depart. He offered a respectful bow. Then the three travelers disappeared beneath the forest canopy. They had not ridden more than 2 hours before the first sign appeared. It was subtle enough that Lyra nearly missed it.
An old milestone beside the trail bore weathered carvings marking
the distance to villages that no longer existed. Someone had recently scratched a new symbol into the stone.
A simple circle surrounding 3 intersecting lines. Aldrin dismounted immediately. Rowan's face grew unexpectedly grave.
"Impossible."
Lyra examined the carving. "You've seen it before?"
Rowan nodded once.
"Only in the oldest records."
"What does it mean?"
Rowan answered in little more than a whisper.
"The cartographers."
Aldrin frowned. "I thought they were myth."
"So did everyone."
Rowan touched the carved symbol gently. "Until now." Lyra looked between them. "Would either of you mind explaining?" Rowan remained focused on the stone.
"Long before kingdoms, before even the White Mantle, there were wanderers who believed reality itself could be measured, mapped, and adjusted."
"Adjusted?"
"They claimed every mountain, river, and star occupied a precise place within a greater design."
He looked toward the endless forest. "Most scholars dismissed them as philosophers."
Aldrin slowly shook his head.
"Edris mentioned them only once."
Rowan turned sharply.
"In the journal?" "A single line." Aldrin searched his memory.
"Beware those who mistake understanding the map for owning the world."
Rowan's expression darkened. "Then the journal knew." Lyra folded her arms.
"Let's assume these cartographers were real. Why would they collect the seals?"
Neither man answered immediately. Finally Aldrin spoke. "Because if the seals don't imprison the echo," Rowan finished quietly, "they may also mark something."
The implication settled over them like gathering storm clouds. They continued eastward, but the forest had changed.
Animals still watched from the undergrowth, yet many now seemed uneasy.
Deer repeatedly glanced toward the sky.
Birds abandoned nests without obvious reason. Even the streams no longer flowed with their earlier confidence.
By evening they reached a broad clearing dominated by the ruins of a circular stone structure almost completely reclaimed by vines. Broken columns lay scattered among waist-high grass. In the center stood a pedestal supporting nothing at all.
Rowan stopped walking the instant he saw it. "No."
Aldrin looked toward him.
"You know this place?" Rowan nodded slowly.
"There was once a compass here."
Lyra walked to the empty pedestal. "Someone stole it?" Rowan approached with visible reluctance. "No ordinary compass."
He brushed away centuries of moss with trembling fingers. Beneath the growth an inscription emerged in remarkably preserved lettering. Aldrin knelt beside him and translated aloud.
"When the roads are forgotten, the center remembers." Rowan closed his eyes. "The compass of origins." Lyra sighed. "Another legend."
"Another one becoming inconveniently real," Rowan replied. Fresh footprints crossed the clearing.
"Not many. Perhaps half a dozen people." Aldrin examined them carefully. "Heavy boots." Rowan pointed toward one particularly deep impression. "And iron-shod staffs." Lyra frowned. "Travelers?" Aldrin slowly stood. "No. He looked toward the eastern tree line where the tracks disappeared. Professionals. As twilight deepened, they made camp within the ruined circle. Rowan insisted upon placing small polished stones at 8 points around the perimeter before sleeping. Lyra noticed each stone emitted the faintest glow once darkness fully arrived. "Protective spell?" she asked. Rowan smiled. "Old habit." Aldrin remained awake longer than the others, studying the ancient journal beside the fire. Several pages still refused to reveal their faded writing despite everything Rowan had shown him. He gently rested one hand upon the leather cover. "What am I still missing?" he whispered. The journal, naturally, offered no reply. Hours passed. The fire settled into glowing embers. One by one the forest sounds quieted until only distant insects continued their endless chorus. Then Aldrin heard footsteps. They were calm. Unhurried. Too deliberate to belong to wandering animals. He quietly closed the journal without waking the others. A lone figure emerged from the darkness beyond. Rowan's protective stones. The stranger wore a long gray coat dusted by travel rather than robes, and instead of weapons carried an elegant leather case strapped across his back. He appeared middle-aged, clean-shaven, with calm eyes that reflected the firelight but revealed remarkably little emotion. He stopped just beyond the glowing boundary created by Rowan's stones and offered a courteous bow. "Good evening," he said pleasantly. Aldrin rose slowly. "You've been following us." "Only since the village." "Who are you?" The stranger smiled politely. "An observer." Rowan awakened instantly at the sound of unfamiliar voices. The moment he saw the man beyond the protective circle, every trace of sleep vanished from his face. "Leave," Rowan said sharply. The stranger looked almost disappointed. "After so many centuries, I hoped for a warmer welcome." Lyra had silently drawn both knives before standing. "You know him?" Rowan's voice remained tense. "No." He never looked away from the visitor. "But I recognize what he carries." The stranger slowly removed the leather case from his shoulder and laid it upon the ground. Carefully, almost reverently, he opened the brass clasps. Inside rested dozens of rolled maps. Some appeared freshly drawn. Others looked impossibly ancient, their parchment untouched by time. Each map shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight. The stranger selected one and unrolled it across a flat stone. Instead of depicting kingdoms or rivers, it showed intricate glowing lines crisscrossing the continent like veins beneath transparent skin. 3 brilliant white points pulsed upon the map. One had already turned dark. The stranger looked up at Aldrin with the same pleasant smile. "Allow me to introduce myself properly." He placed one hand over his heart. "My name is Cashin." His smile widened only slightly. "I am the last cartographer." The fire cracked softly between them, but no one sitting within the protective circle moved. The name carried the weight of a forgotten warning, and even without understanding the full danger, Lyra could see the effect it had on Rowan and Aldrin. Neither reacted like they had met an enemy. They reacted like they had encountered a piece of history that should have remained buried. Cashin waited patiently, seemingly comfortable with the suspicion surrounding him. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not attempt to cross the glowing boundary. He simply stood beside his impossible maps while the forest watched from every direction. "You expect us to believe you?" Lyra asked. Cashin looked at her. "No." His answer came so quickly that it surprised her. "Belief is unnecessary. Verification is more useful." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not how normal people introduce themselves. Normal people rarely carry maps of places that change while being observed." He glanced toward Rowan. "Your friend knows this." Rowan's expression remained hard. "Do not call me friend." "Fair enough." Cashin folded his hands behind his back. "Then I will call you the last root keeper, and you may continue calling me whatever makes you comfortable." Aldrin stepped forward. "Why are you here?" Cashin looked at the glowing stones surrounding the camp. Because the road you are following no longer exists. It exists. Today.
Cashin pointed toward the map.
Tomorrow it will not. Aldrin studied the strange lines on the parchment. They moved subtly, shifting positions like living threads.
What are these?
The world's original pathways. Lyra glanced at him. Roads? Not roads made by people. Cashin tapped the map gently. Connections.
Places where magic, life, and time naturally align.
Rowan's voice lowered. The ley routes. Cashin nodded.
Your order called them that.
Aldrin looked up sharply. You know the White Mantle archives. I know many archives.
Cashin's expression remained neutral.
That was our purpose. Collecting knowledge. Understanding patterns. And controlling them? Cashin did not answer immediately.
The hesitation was brief, but Aldrin noticed it.
Every group that
claims to protect the world eventually convinces itself it has earned the right to decide for everyone else.
Cashin looked directly at him. Your order sealed the echo without asking what it wanted.
The words struck harder because they echoed Aldrin's own recent realization.
Lyra noticed his reaction.
You agree with him? She asked quietly.
Aldrin looked away from the fire.
I agree that history is more complicated than we were taught.
Cashin smiled faintly.
That is why you are the only one who can succeed.
Rowan turned sharply. Explain.
Cashin rolled the map closed.
Because everyone else involved wants the past to justify them. And you don't?
No. For the first time something resembling sadness appeared in Cashin's expression.
I want the future to survive.
The answer was too simple, and that made it more concerning.
Aldrin stepped closer to the edge of the protective stones. You are collecting the seals.
Cashin's eyes shifted briefly toward the darkened point on the map.
No.